Good evening and welcome to First Talk with Violet Gonda. On the program tonight, we are going to discuss the gender disparity in Parliament and issues concerning women with the Women's Coalition Chairperson, Virginia Muwanigwa, and the outgoing Deputy Minister of Women's Affairs, Jessie Majome. Welcome on the program, ladies.
Thank you, Violet.
Thank you, Violet. And hi, Virginia.
Let me start with Jessie Majome. First of all, can you tell us what is the exact composition or gender composition in Parliament right now?
Right now, women members of Parliament comprise 33% of members of Parliament. That is a composite of both houses, the National Assembly as well as the Senate,
So,
up from 17.8%.
So, but in terms of numbers, figures, is it 90 women and more than 400 men?
Well, it will have to be 33% of 330, something like that.
Okay, and you said
Whatever
it's
that
up.
adds up. I'm not very good with my math.
And you say it's gone up.
From 17.8%.
But it will still appear that 33% is such a low figure.
Definitely, it's not 50%. It's not 50%, and it's definitely not 52%, which is proportional to the numbers of women. And but also, sadly, if it wasn't for the quota, the 60 seats of women, the temporary 60 seats that is temporary for this parliament and the next parliament, we would have even less than a smaller percentage. We would have 12% of women. If it wasn't for the 60%, would have gone down from 17.8% down to 12%. But thanks to the quota, the 60 women who are on women's seats from proportional representation, the temporary 60 women's seats, we've gone higher and are at 33.3%. But if we took those away, we'd be way down. 12% would be the lowest ever.
Virginia, what do you make of this?
Hello, sorry, a bit faint. Hello, can you come again?
So what do you make of the composition of Parliament, the gender composition?
We celebrate that we now have 33% representatives in Parliament being women, the average. But going into the elections, we had been hoping for 50% representation, equality. So obviously that tells us that we still have more work to do to ensure that we have equal representation in Parliament. Having said that, though, we are celebrating what we've got for now, and the work that we need to do is to ensure that those women become truly representative of the interests of the women of Zimbabwe.
Now, Jessie says that if it wasn't for the proportional representation system, the figure will be down to about 12%. Why is it that women are failing to, enter politics?
I wouldn't actually. Yes, definitely. We also owe a lot to the additional 6 pieces that we managed to get in the Constitution, because that is what made all the difference. Because looking at the number of actually elected candidates, we were very low, even lower than we had been before. I wouldn't actually say that women are failing to enter politics, because women do participate in politics. It's just that they are more there within the lower ranks of the political leadership. So one finds that as the majority voters, we are there. We are the majority in the political parties. But the leadership is still reserved for the males in our society. And this is a challenge that we just have to continue raising, that we need to find representation of women, not just at the lower ranks, but throughout the hierarchies of the political parties.
So, Jessie, what do you make of that? You have Zimbabwean politics, which is dominated by males, and yet women are more, especially the majority in the country. So why is it you don't have more women in decision-making positions?
Okay. It's because of the patriarchal nature of our society. Our society is still dominated by men. You would find that, you see, I want to slightly differ with Virginia because from my experience and my present reality in a political party, there are women in political parties. They are actually, because they are in the lower ranks and a few in the higher ranks. And the lower ranks are actually the ones that matter when you are picking candidates, people who will be candidates for your parties, because you see, we need to dissect this issue of low representation of women at the party level and then at the national elections level. What happens is that in political parties, women don't occupy, they don't really, there are fewer as members. Women are fewer, they don't join political parties as much as men, so they are fewer. And then they also don't lead political parties as much as men. In a party primary election that chooses who is candidate or not, the majority of the voters are men. And also the culture of the politics that we play out is a culture of politics of patronage that favors men. Generally, where people we have a long way to go in Zimbabwe in developing our democracy. So that we get to a point where people choose a leader more according to what they are likely, how well they are likely to represent them, and less for what they think they might bring, what goodies they might bring them, or what they might buy them, and so on.
But Jessie, if the majority of the electorate are women, why is it women are not voting for women, for other women?
Because you see, women don't just emerge. Women don't just appear on ballot papers because they are women. They appear on ballot papers because their political parties have chosen them as candidates. So the process that I just explained is what causes the very complex process of an intense process of parties choosing candidates is what gives the electorate. When people vote in a general election, they vote for who their party has given them. That's what they do. And so, and the other thing again is, you see, there are women also who contested, but who lost to the people. Women might want to vote for women, but women are not just going to vote for women simply because they are women. They will vote for them in a general election, depending on whether or not those women also carry their political ideals and so on. I am not going to vote for a woman simply because she's a woman. I'm going to vote for a woman if she is of a party that I also support. So ultimately, we need to have. So therefore, for this to work out, we need all parties pushing more women to the ballot papers, so that either way, chances are a person will vote for a woman even if they are voting for their party.
Jessie, what role are you as women's groups, sorry, not Jessie, but Virginia, what role are you as women's groups playing in terms of pushing women to participate in politics?
Yeah, maybe before I respond to that, I would just like to take up the issue that Jessie has just left now and say that, she has already mentioned that, we are in a patriarchal society that basically believes more in men than it does in women. And what that means is that a lot of the electorate has been socialized to believe that our leaders will be men. And that actually links in with my response to your question on what are we doing as women's groups to ensure that we have more women being candidates but also participating in politics. We are seeking to actually deconstruct the views, the social view that women cannot also be leaders. We do have women as leaders at society, at local level, at national level, but we don't have enough and we don't actually recognize enough of the attributes that they bring to the political field. What we've also been doing as women's groups is just starting to get the women themselves to believe in themselves, to be confident in themselves as leaders, not just in politics, but across the both social, economic sectors. We've also been capacitating them because, in leadership, you then also need some skills. You need to be able to be a good negotiator. You need to be able to campaign effectively. You need to be able to deal with the media. You need to be able to mobilize the resources to be able to deliver, whether it's your promises, but also to carry out your campaign. And this is what organizations like the Women in Politics Support Unit, that is under the Women's Coalition, have been doing.
Right.
And we've also been lobbying for a conducive environment for those women that put themselves forward as candidates or that are interested in participating, that we need an environment which is free from violence. We need an environment that recognizes and encourages women as participants. and which is why we then start to ask whether it's the political parties to say, can we ensure that at least the representation of men and women within whatever levels of decision making.
And Virginia, why is women's leadership important, or is it? Do you think it's essential in the progress of our country?
Women's leadership is essential to the progress of our country as men's leadership, as the representation of youth, both male and female, is to our country. Why do we say that? Because in any situation, we live as a diverse group, and for us to really say we are progressing as a nation, we need to be able to get those diverse groups, their interests addressed. And how best do we do that? But to ensure that the groups are represented. The women as leaders bring in a new dimension to the whole issue of political leadership, among other things. Just as we know that men have been bringing their own dimension, we are saying let also women have as much say in how our country is governed as the men.
And Jessie, I'd just like to read to you excerpt from an article that was written by, a fellow gender activist, Barbara Mangami, and she wrote, "These issues that plague African political parties could be mitigated or minimized by having an effective presence of competent women who are, after all, more than 50% of the population. The issue of weak links to the society which they are supposed to represent will be minimized or eliminated because women could use their unique communication skills to reach target populations and help them articulate the issues and problems. They would therefore represent their constituents more effectively." On this issue of competent women, do you think we have enough competent women in decision-making positions?
Violet, once we say that we have insufficient, we have too few women, absolutely, we have fewer, we have less than the 52% of our population. Therefore means that we have few women. We can't have, with the problem is that we have too few women. And I want to really, I have an issue with this, with this whole question of competent women, non-competent women. And sorry to say, I think that debate is it's actually very sexist. It's very sexist. That issue always arises. I don't know why when we talk about women in politics. When we talk about men in politics, nobody ever asks, oh, are they competent? No, that issue never, ever arises. And it's one of those devices that patriarchy uses to keep women out. Politics is a wide open field. It's absolutely for absolutely everybody and anybody. It's not, you don't need academic qualifications, you don't need technical qualifications. All you need to do is to be able to articulate, to be able to assess issues and to articulate them and communicate them. And anybody can do that. And so I really hope that we can discourage women from getting out the microscope and looking for the microscope of women, because we're only doing that for, why does that issue never arise, with men? Why are women so hard on each other? The reason why we have too few women in politics is not because that women are incompetent. No, definitely not. If we look at even this crop of parliament, tell me, this is my second term, and in Parliament, and I've been in council, and as well. When I look around the men, I'm sorry to say, I don't get impressed a lot of the time with the quality of people that are there. There are people who they're different, the abilities and strengths, are spread evenly across the genders. Let's stop, keeping women out by asking whether they are competent or not, because I'm sorry, it doesn't really help things. I'm really hoping that we can look at the issue. Let's get women in their numbers. And if we should find that there are women there who need help in building and developing their capacity to do so, let us do so. This is what the women's organizations must be doing, because they are also, even among the men, there are men who also need to develop their capacity, who are in politics, who some of them might not even be able to read or write. This is men or women, and some of them might also not be skilled in computers. Some of them might not be skilled in economics and so on. So, that's the role of, if we're to develop our democracy, this is what women's organizations and democracy promoters must be doing. Let us equip people, male or women women do not have the monopoly of not knowing what to do. But can I just also say something that's very important?
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are other two very important barriers to women breaking out in politics. One of them is the cost of it. It is expensive. It costs money to run, to be a politician. It costs money to campaign. It costs money to network. It costs money. And there's nobody out there who's giving money to women. I will speak like for myself. In this last election, I received absolutely no support, from anywhere, and I relied on my own personal savings, and it's at a, it's at a disadvantage to me, you know what I mean? And how many women, once we do that, women are, we have less money than men. And so we need to look at the financing of politics, and the financing of politics and the financing of women in politics. We can talk and talk all we like, but as long as we're not creating vehicles for supporting women's political activity, they'll stay out of it, because men are better off. They know captains of industry, they can network, they can get money, they have businesses, and women don't have these things. And even if you're elected, for you to continue performing and to be visible, you actually need money to be doing a lot of things like administration and so on. And then the other thing that we have is our political culture. I'm glad that this election was not characterized by too much violence, but the culture of intimidation and violence that has been structural, that also frightens women out of politics. Even if there is no overt violence, a lot of women are afraid because, like in Zimbabwe right now, the political environment is not free at all. There is a lot of fear and a lot of intimidation as to what can happen to you if you speak out, if you say this or that. The people keep saying, you are so brave. You actually dare to speak. And, for women, we have less defense mechanisms available.
Mm-hmm.
The other issue is what Virginia said, the media. Women are few also because the media doesn't cover us.
I will come to that issue. Jessie, I'll come to that issue of the media, because I would also like to hear your views on that. But you've raised quite a few issues there, and I would like to hear Virginia's thoughts on some of those issues, starting with the issue of competency or the quality of female leaders. Do you agree with Jessie's points on this, Virginia?
I definitely agree with her, and the women of Zimbabwe, the people of Zimbabwe. If we're going to be looking at competence, that should not be a barometer that is only used when women come into leadership. It should be a barometer that is used for everybody. Having said that also, I want to say that part of then also getting competence or really becoming excellent at whatever area you find yourself in is built through experience. So as long as women are shut out from certain areas, they will have, yes, their personal attributes, the attributes that come from whatever education they've had, academic or life skills, but they will not have the kind of experience that puts you in the right place to be able to deliver, and which is why we are saying we want to see women represented in politics and decision-making, so that in addition to their natural abilities, in addition to whatever it is that they've learned, they also gain the relevant experience to be able to deliver to the people of Zimbabwe the mandate that our politicians have. And looking also at the issue, I already raised the issue of resource mobilization, because that is one of the areas that has kept women from really participating effectively in politics. Having been able to go through the barriers of just even yourself not being sure you're able to run and compete and win, you now need to deal with the practical issues of what resources do you need to be able to campaign effectively? What are the steps that you need to follow, and what resources are needed for you to be able to become a person that is recognized as a candidate for a party? And we are saying, one of the things we would want to see the politics of Zimbabwe have is not to be the kind of politics that really expect an individual to look into their own resources and ensure that they become the candidate of the people because they have the resources. We've got a lot of people that may be very competent, maybe the kind of politicians we're looking for, but don't have the resources. It means they will not be able to participate. And as for the issue also of the violence, before we even get to the intimidation, to the conflicts that arises from elections, one of the things that a patriarchal society has is that already as women, as individuals, in our own homes, in our own families, there is a conflict that you need to fight. There's a conflict you need to get through. As a woman, married or otherwise, you may need to be getting some kind of agreement from family members to participate. And what we are saying is, starting from the household level, let's have the kind of environment where a woman has as much choice as the next man to be able to say, yes, I want to run for office and I want to deal with those pitfalls that come with running for political office. So we really need to be able to see a political environment that does not further intimidate women beyond already the gender-based violence that we know sometimes they live with within their families, within their own homes.
But on the issue of financing, isn't this an issue that women's groups should have by now found a way of, helping some of these politicians? How active are women's groups, especially when it comes to dealing with these matters? Shouldn't you by now have some kind of a fund to help women who want to take up politics?
You know, we've done some gender scoping studies just to look at the environment, the funding environment for NGOs or for gender-based activities. And one of the things that actually comes out, and we know that from our own experience, is that when you look at the quantum amount of money that women's organizations get to be able to run with the programs that they do, and compare it to what the rest of the civil society organizations get, we get just a very small percent of that money. And it is actually a miracle that we are able to do what we do with the kind of money that we get. So we continue, yes, looking for additional funding. But again, one sees that our society would much rather pour money into organizations led by men, organizations run by men, rather than the organizations that are run by women. Because remember also, the work that we are doing is starting to challenge our societal makeup. It's starting to say, can we as a society also give as much opportunity to women as they are to men? But the reality that we live with is, as far as funding, access to funding is concerned, we get very little funding in relation to other organizations. And we have also started appealing to just the funding partners to say, can we start to see that we address that anomaly, because it also says nothing, or it says about our commitment as funding partners to gender equality, to women's empowerment.
And Jessie, going back to the issue of the quality of our, politicians, and going back to the article that was written by Barbara Mangami, and if I can quote another excerpt from her article, she says, the current entrenched system is exclusionary to women, most of whom are token parliamentarians and with no real decision-making capacity. The system is broken and needs serious reform. As a parliamentarian, what can you say about that issue of token parliamentarians?
Sorry, what did she describe the system as? She says the present something system. I didn't get that.
The current entrenched system is exclusionary to women.
Entrenched system.
Yeah, and most of whom are token parliamentarians, the women in parliament.
You know what? With the greatest of respect to Barbara Mangami, I'm sorry to say, with the greatest of respect to her, I don't think she's got her facts right. You know what I mean? And, I think with the greatest of respect to her, I think she is actually undermining, and actually also undermining a lot of women who are working so hard in parliament. She's just taking a black brush and she's saying that they are useless. And I think that's very unfair.
I don't think she's saying that all the women are useless. Sorry, okay, go on.
No, but she's saying most of them are token ones. And I'm actually wondering where she's getting this, that they are token, because from where I sit, I was a member of the 7th Parliament of Zimbabwe. I'm in the 8th Parliament. The 8th Parliament hasn't started, but I can tell you, I don't say the same. From what I've seen, I haven't seen women being token there. I've seen women standing up and debating. I've seen women active in their committees. I've seen women asking hard questions in Parliament. I've seen women really busy, hard at work in the constituencies. And so what I think she's doing is that I think she's placing the fault. She's assigning the blame where it doesn't belong. The problem is the political system that we have. We have the Parliament as a whole is actually, in my view, it has been a token parliament, it has been a rubber stamp parliament. And I don't see why you can say women are the ones that are not effective decision makers, because in that parliament there are actually more men. We have a system where the executive arm of government is the one that drives the legislative program. That's what the 7th parliament was in the former constitution. And I actually don't see it changing. We do have a new constitution, but I can tell you, mark my words, we are unlikely to actually ever, we've tried to strengthen parliament as a whole, but the executive arm of government is going to keep on sponsoring bills. And I'll be very surprised if even in the new constitutional dispensation, we're going to have like a private members building.
Hold on, Virginia. Mm-hmm.
Can I just finish up and say, there's a stigma against women politicians. We just assume that they don't know what they are doing, they don't have capacity, they can't do anything. And I think we really need to work to remove that kind of image.
Okay, all right. So, sorry for interrupting you, Jessie, but let's just hear Virginia's thoughts on this in terms of token parliamentarians.
Yeah, I think for me, an issue again, just as we talk about issues of competence, is that should not be a description that is used only when it comes to measuring whether women have been effective or not. It should actually be an instrument that is used across the board in parliament. Both men and women sit in parliament, and we want to be able to say among all the men and women that are sitting in parliament, who are the ones that are effective, who are the ones that may not be as effective. And I just want to say, when we look at the 7th parliament, for example, we had a milestone, the passing of the constitution, that had almost more than 75% of the demands that women had made. And that really had a lot of gains for the women of Zimbabwe. Part of that was due to the representation by women in parliament that we were working with as women's groups, that we were working with as other groups, civil society, to say let's ensure that these issues get into the constitution. They would not have been able to also defend those gains in parliament if they had been token. And when you also look at even this whole issue of saying when it comes to women, then they are supposed to be, working much harder. It should be everybody in parliament, everybody in a position of leadership, in a position of decision making, to be accountable to those that they serve, not just the women. We are not saying that the women should not be effective. I'm saying that let's actually demand from all our leaders the same kind of effectiveness, the same kind of competence, the same kind of work or delivery of what it is that they promise to us, regardless of whether they are men or they are women.
But as an observer and looking at what's been happening in Parliament in the last few years, do you think there is also an element of victim mentality when it comes to women? Because a lot of times we hear people actually pinpointing where men are going wrong, but when they target or they address certain issues to do with specific, with women specifically, then women's rights groups start saying that women are being targeted. Do you think this is a fair criticism?
But Violet, can I jump in there? You see, I'm
Okay.
fascinated by this conversation.
Yeah.
You see, because it actually never gets happen. It never gets to happen that men are pointed out as men. Conversations like this and criticisms like from that article, they attack women as women. I don't. So it's difficult. It's not possible to compare women being criticized as opposed to men being criticized.
Mm-hmm.
When males are criticized, they are criticized as parliamentarians, not as women, as male parliamentarians. Yes. It never, their agenda never, when men are seen totally as politicians, the agenda never comes in. If a male politician messes up, he is treated as a politician. If you said, MPs, that MP has done this, these MPs have this, it's never said, male MPs. I've never heard of any way male MPs are talked about. You see, so it's not that it never happens. It never arises. People nitpick on women. Like in this case, this article is devoting itself to looking at women MPs are this, women are that, and so why there is no criticism from male MPs. This is just looking at women MPs, and the men never happens to them. And why are we doing that? Why does it happen that people pick on women? Their gender, women's gender comes to the fore. Why is that? You know, what if we looked at male MPs? We never do that. And I'll be surprised. This article, I'd really like to read it, but I would bet that it hasn't looked at what male MPs are doing.
Actually, Jessie, on that issue.
They are just politicians.
Actually, Jessie, on that issue, before we go to Virginia, she does talk about various issues affecting women, and I had actually noticed those two particular points, and that's why I wanted to get your views on that. But on other issues, she says it's a shame that when a woman commits herself to a life of politics, she's also committing herself to a life of intimidation, ridicule, torture, marginalization, or because she's a woman who may decide that business as usual is no longer acceptable. So she's also talking about some of the issues that you've raised.
But ironically, she's actually also contributing to that ridicule and so on. You know, I can tell you, you know, one of my biggest sources of frustration and hurt as an MP is that people look at my gender. You know, they don't. It's very rare to get when you stand up there and you start to give your femininity that people want to write about or talk about. So political ideas and your views and your leadership come in after they've talked about what you are dressed like, what you look like, and so on. And this is the thing that we must start to do. And if, you know, I want to encourage writers even of articles like this person who has written, and also even the media, that, you know what, let's take away the spotlight away from the femininity of women MPs. Because it's stereotyping us. Let's be equal. Let's deal with them as equal politicians. Let's deal with their politics. Let's see what have they contributed. What do they say? Let's stop looking at, you know. Let's put them on an even scale. Because even the media does that. You know, I'm speaking from experience also because I've had an interesting experience on Facebook. I use social media a lot. And you can actually go and look if you want. On Facebook, there was actually a Facebook platform that was started called Zim Elections 2013 Know Your Candidates, where the person who started it was putting up CVs and profiles of candidates for the 2013 elections. And he did a string of 4 men from different parties, and he then put my profile there. And I was aghast. I was actually deeply hurt I was shocked by the comments that were being made by the posts. They were all about my hairstyle, they were all about my dressing, and so on. And none of the men, they didn't deal with anything like that about their looks. They were saying, you know, even that she looks like a man, she should be more, and so on. But for all the men that they were profiling, they discussed their politics, they discussed what their political brand is about, their views and their achievements. And there was nothing at all about me, you know what I mean? So I think we should really stop, you know, it is very unfair, because once that happens, it keeps on looking at me as a woman, which I am, but not as a serious politician. And then people don't know my politics. I have less support. It's like a vicious circle. I then don't get as much of a political profile and clout as I should, because they're busy looking at my dress, talking about my dress. So they're not dealing with me as a political player, as a serious contender as well. So I think we really need to move to that arena where we get the media, we get the academics and so on, and political parties and our society to turn off the lights that are spotlighting on women politicians, whatever other it is, but and we look at their politics. When we start to do that, people will get used to the fact that we're also politicians, will be equal, they will vote for us more, they'll retain us more, they'll also start appointing us to high positions when we are elected. We are just women, you know, as far as everybody is concerned, and we should stop that.
Virginia, what can you say about that, especially the media's portrayal of women in politics?
Yeah, I'm going to speak first about the issue of victimization, or having women portraying themselves with their victim mentality. We are working with empirical evidence, and the empirical evidence we're working with is that when you go into parliament, women's representation is lower than that of men. This is despite even the affirmative action we fought for, to ensure that we get to a point where there was equality, at least of representation in parliament. We are going even into the schools and saying, what is women's representation in the school system throughout? How are we doing as women? There are disparities against women. You go even into the health institutions, you go into the social sectors, you go into traditional leaders. Who are the traditional leaders that actually are the cultural gatekeepers in society? The majority of them are men, and the women are very scantily represented within that. You go into the business sector, who are the ones that are owning the majority of the wealth in Zimbabwe, regardless of how well we are doing as an economy, how badly we are doing as an economy, but who is better placed between men and women within that whole setup? And we see that women are not as well placed as the men are. So if we are describing our situation and people want to use or to describe that as victim mentality, it is okay because we are describing the situation that we are living in. So one finds that society has to respond to the statistics, to the reality that we are describing as we start to address those key issues because we are citizens of Zimbabwe and we have a right to be represented across the sectors. When it comes to the media, in terms of ownership of the media, the majority or most of the owners of the media, not just in Zimbabwe, are men. And one finds that in terms of even the representation of women within the leadership and decision-making, within the newsrooms, within the ownership of the media, that is vested in the men. And obviously that then is reflected even in the way that they cover issues, not just of women in politics, but of women across the board, socio-economic issues. One finds that the media loses opportunities to be able to profile both men and women in the same way, or to be able to profile both men and women in a way that actually really educates the people of Zimbabwe on who the candidates they should be looking at are. But unfortunately takes the decision to start ridiculing those women that have stood up to be counted within politics. Takes a decision to start trivializing the women, the issues that the women are standing for, and really uses a lot of resources unnecessarily to attack the person of women rather than what it is that they are standing for as potential parliamentarians, as people that are in society. And they do not really acknowledge the contribution that women in their diversity bring to politics. Yet when we look at it, the whole concept, the whole issue, or the whole reason why the media is there is to be able to reflect our society in a way that tells us where we are doing well, where we are not doing as well, and what needs to be done. So the media really has to do a lot of work to be able to objectively cover both men and women in a way that informs and educates the people of Zimbabwe on issues of concern.
Right, but on the other hand, what can the women also do themselves? Because it can't all be the media's fault, for example. And I can give an example of how sometimes, we try to reach out to women parliamentarians to talk to them about what's going on in the country or in parliament. And I can tell you that it's very difficult to get interviews. And, we have a few women like Jessie, Majome, Priscilla Misiara Mshonga, Tabitha Kumalo, who never ever, say no to interviews. But just accessing some of these women in parliament is very difficult. And not just in parliament, even in civil society, just to get women to talk is a big problem. Why is that?
Yeah, that comes from experience, Violet, where past experience, women's experiences with the media has been that, yes, you do agree to an interview is held. We've been talking for a long time. But in some cases, then what comes out does not actually portray you in a way that builds confidence in you as a leader. So obviously what that means as a human is you want to protect yourself, and next time you avoid the situations where you are then used to actually ridicule yourself. Having said that, part of what we are doing, and I'm a journalist, and I'm working with an organization that is working with journalists and NGOs, and part of what we've been doing is to actually encourage women, to strengthen women, to build their capacity, to build their confidence to deal with the media. Because we also recognize that, if you're putting yourself out there as a politician, you need to be able to deal with the media, as you are also needing to be able to deal with the people in your constituency that are different, that may hold different views from the views that you stand for. So we've been working to ensure that women's confidence to deal with the media is built, and really practically saying to them, understand how the media works. The media is not part of your public relations firm. They are looking for information. You need to be able to deal with whatever issues they raise with you. You need to be able to respond to any questions that they raise with you as a politician. Yes, the women may not be using opportunities they should use of profiling themselves within the media. But that is a double-edged sword where most of it is based on their experience or experience of other women before them. So we need to have the women also stepping up, but at the same time we are saying to the media, can you seriously be objective as
Jessie?
you cover?
Okay, Jessie?
Yeah.
Hello, Jessie, you wanted to comment on this issue?
Yeah, because I agree with Virginia 100% that the media has not. It's another vicious circle. The media has not been treating women well. It doesn't, because it would when it profile brings the attention of women politicians. They get interested in us about our personal lives or about our domestic roles and so on. And then they seem to want to cover certain things that are not very helpful in politics. So women politicians are reticent because for them to get where they've gotten, they've worked really hard, and they are cautious. I think a lot of them will understandably be cautious because they don't trust media. They wonder, what do they want to do now? What do they want to bring in? So the media also, it has work to do, and also getting the confidence of women. And on the other hand, we also have to do a lot of work with women politicians to also develop their capacity, such as Virginia was saying, so that we also learn how to work with the media and, so that we see it's a skill that also needs to be learned and so on. And the other thing that we can also do, because the reality is a woman has to work so hard to get the attention of the media. She has to do totally outrageous things sometimes. And we're still ignored. And so what we can do is to use, like I do myself, I realize that because the Media Monitoring Project of Zimbabwe released 2 studies last year. They were monitoring gender and the women in the constitution making process, and also gender in the media generally. And they found that this is about in 3 months of last year, only maybe 18% of women's voices, women's issues, and pictures even were ever published in all the major papers of Zimbabwe. They just ignore us. And even about a few in 2008, Thelma Chikwana and the Zimbabwe Union of Journalists published the results of a research that they did on the coverage of women in the 2008 women candidates in the 2008 elections. And as a result of what they found, they published a booklet called "Women Walk Silently to Parliament." They found that women politicians were just not covered even in the campaigns and so on. So the reality is, in politics, if you are not seen, if you are not heard, you don't exist. You do a tremendous amount of work. And I know women politicians work so hard, a lot of them. They work so very hard, but they work away from the scenes. But if nobody knows what you're doing, nobody else sees it, you are just nothing. People will say you've done absolutely nothing, and they won't vote for you next time because they think you're not capable. But so what I've resorted to do, I've discovered, I've had to deal with the harsh reality that, I need to get my message out there. So I've resorted to social media. It's free. It's limitless. I have created my own media on Facebook, Twitter, and I've also started a constituency newsletter because that's my own newspaper. I'm not going to get coverage in these other papers and on TVs and on radio. So I said, look, I'm going to make my own media in my own constituency. I will deal with I will communicate myself, because if I don't do that, I practically don't exist, and I'm measured, badly. As a politician, I'm actually written off as useless and not visible, not capable, and that also reflects on other women. I know that when I work as an MP, because I try to work very hard, I realize that all the while people are judging women politicians when they are judging me. So I do realize that I must work extremely hard, and I must actually showcase what I'm doing so that people say that, women can actually do it, they'll do it, and so that, I'm hoping, clearly I know that it then has an effect on other women who are around me, before me, and after me, and so on.
And also, Jessie, as you're the outgoing Deputy Minister in the Ministry of Women's Affairs, what would you say are the most important things that need to be done in this ministry that you would recommend as an outgoing Deputy Minister regarding women?
I would... Okay. I think the ministry needs to truly and fully implement the national gender policy that we have, because it covers aspects such as this, and also in particular to develop a working, a framework and an action plan for implementing the 20 targets of the SADC Protocol on Gender and Development. That require, one of which is that by the year 2013 we must have no less than 50% of women in decision-making positions. And there's also an article about the portrayal of women in the media, that there must also be gender equality, as well as other issues such as education. There are targets there in deployment and in the economy and the HIV and AIDS. So that's what the ministry needs. We need to do everything we can to meet the 2013 targets on the SADC Protocol on Gender and Development, not only on decision making but also on education, on health, in the media and the economy, in light of all the other, the other targets. And that's what the ministry needs to do, in my view.
Do you see this happening, and why didn't it happen in the time that you were in the ministry?
It's a long story, Violet. I think the ministry needs to develop the capacity to be able to do those things. It needs to really get serious and put itself in a position where it can actually do that work.
Right.
If it doesn't do those things, it won't do them again.
And Virginia, do you think the ministry is doing enough to highlight the plight of women in Zimbabwe, and also to tackle issues that affect women in the country?
Yeah, as long as we still have inequalities and women are not as empowered as the men are, there is a lot of work that the ministry can do and should continue to do. And one of the areas I really think that needs to be prioritized by the ministry is just demanding implementation of the instruments, the policies. Now we've got a very good framework through the Constitution of Zimbabwe to just demand that we start to realize the aspirations that are included in the Constitution. There should not so much be an issue of implementing themselves, but an issue of policy oversight across all the ministries. As the Ministry of Women Affairs, Gender and Community Development, they have a very good mandate to be able to just cast a bird's eye view on what government is doing in all the ministries, going into the Ministry of Mining, going into the Ministry of Tourism, Health, Education, across the sectors, and saying what are the gender dynamics within the ministries, who is represented where, how are the budgets being allocated. When we do the budget allocations at ministry level, who are the ones that are benefiting, men or women, who's not benefiting and why? And start to just ask those questions that make sure that they don't find themselves as a ministry being expected to implement, which they can't do because they are one of the ministries that gets the least amount within the national budget. But start to get the other ministries to implement what it is that they're supposed to implement. Going forward, I think the ministry is very well placed.
The ministry has actually gender focal points in all ministries, but it has not been utilizing them, and it just needs to use them.
Yeah. So there's a very good opportunity going forward for the ministry to use the Constitution as a Bible in ensuring that we see what is working, what's not working within the country of Zimbabwe. And Jessie has already mentioned the SADC Gender Protocol, which is very good because it is one instrument that has looked at all the issues that would be issues of concern, not just for women of Zimbabwe, but for men and women of Zimbabwe, and said, okay, what needs to happen to ensure that we have equality? And if, as I know that the ministry is involved in some way through the SADC Gender Protocol and wanting to see to what extent Zimbabwe is doing well on implementation of the targets within the SADC Gender Protocol. Going forward, this is an area that would be very important to say, where are we as a country? What has been done? 2015 is just around the corner, yes, so maybe we have 33%, maybe we won't be able to do 50% now before the end of 2015. But how well are we doing? How are we ensuring that of the representation that we have, how are we supporting the women to be effective in that position? And how are we as a government ensuring that all that we have promised the women of Zimbabwe becomes a reality?
And Virginia,
it is not a favor. It is not a favor, but it is a right that the people of Zimbabwe, the women of Zimbabwe have to actually start to realize the things that our constitution has promised us.
What about the women's movement, Virginia? Is there enough unity in the movement to, to push for issues that concern women?
In terms of objectives, of our objectives as a group, as a sector, there is unity in working towards gender equality and women's empowerment in Zimbabwe. So there is no confusion around the objectives that we work for as the women's movement. We may use different strategies, which some people then see and think that means it's fragmentation. And I already mentioned the issue of resources, access to resources, which means sometimes we find ourselves competing for the same resources and therefore not being able to really work together effectively. But we've been able to work even within that environment and get to a point where we are saying, yes, we have a common objective. How do we actually start to realize that objective? How do we start to work with the Ministry of Women Affairs, among other relevant ministries, to ensure that the women of Zimbabwe are represented? How do we start to use our competitive advantage as women, which is our numbers, to just speak out on those issues that we want to see? And this works very well in the issue around the making of the Constitution. It also works very well in the adoption of the Act on Domestic Violence. So we need to just continue. Yes, unity is required, but we also have to recognize that in any movement, there will be a diversity of opinions, and that should not be seen as a weakness, but it should be seen as a reflection of the various interests that exist even within the women's movement itself, just as it also happens even with the other movements, the civil society movements, even within government itself.
Right. And Jessie, we heard Virginia saying that there's need for capacity building, and you also touched a bit on that. Now, just to conclude, Barbara Mangami also has, one or two recommendations, and these are teaching basic politics and governance at an earlier age in schools. She also says creating safe spaces for women to engage in political discourse by implementing punitive measures to hostile or inappropriate male politicians, and respect for women's voices in politics by both men and women, and also creating spaces that nurture women's political ambitions and desire to be of service. Examples, creating feminist think tanks or institutions which groom and mentor young women. What can you say about this? Do you agree with these recommendations, that these are needed in Zimbabwe?
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree very much, and I would add also just general civic political education to the general population, and also the issue of the media, the liberation of the media, so that I'm thinking that if that happens, there will be less competition for the media. It will then actually be possible maybe for our media to be more focused on issues, because women generally deal with community issues, and those are not usually, they don't usually get the time of day in the limited media space.
Hello, Virginia?
Hello?
Hello. And do you also agree that these recommendations will go a long way into, resolving some of the problems that women face in Zimbabwe?
Totally agree. In fact, what the recommendations are is a summation of basically what the women are doing, the women's organizations are doing in Zimbabwe in terms of advocacy. This is exactly some of the things that we've been doing and that we've been asking for. The issue of mentoring each other to be in leadership. The issue of creating safe spaces for women to be able to introspect and also to be able to build each other's confidence and to be able to build capacity. This is what has been happening. So yes, I do agree with what Barbara is saying.
That was the chairperson of the Women's Coalition, Virginia Muwanigwa, and Outgoing Women's Affairs Deputy Minister Jessie Majome. Thank you very much for watching First Talk with Violet Gonda.